From Wall Street to Main Street to help small business owners have the same capital as corporate America and give them the same resources as a larger company. We cover business funding, business credit, scaling, business consulting, and much more. Check out the website at shieldadvisorygroup.com. Welcome to the show, The Liquid Lunch Project.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Liquid Lunch Podcast. I am Matthew R. Meehan, alongside my partner, the Professor Luigi Rosabianco. What's on tap today, Lou?
Double trouble. We've got two podcast guests interviewing two podcast hosts interviewing two podcast guests. And Matt, today we're dealing with a subject that you know is near and dear to my heart. We have had several guests on our podcast that have leveraged a successful sports career into business. Now, I know there's no lack of sports analogies, but I'm looking forward to talking to Elliot and Dom Chapman, founder, numerous businesses, including marketing funnels and football coaching schools. That's European football. So Elliot, Dom, welcome to the podcast. Tell us, how did you successfully leverage a career in sports into a equally successful career in business? Did you find parallels?
Gents, firstly, thanks for having us. The next thing I would say is I probably wouldn't proclaim that it was that successful. But in terms of parallels, there are without question parallels between sports and business. I think anybody who has played particularly team sports, there are an abundance of parallels. You know, if you're building or you're running a team, you're coaching a team, let's use football as the example, you need to have everybody essentially pulling in the same direction, and everybody bought into the tactics, everybody bought into what you're trying to do. That is no different to running an agency or running any other business. So huge parallels between the two. I'm going to smile every time you say successful sports career, because he's going to absolutely hate the fact that we're talking about it. So we can continue that narrative.
Well, Elliot, there's a deeper joke there, right? Because I really feel that there's always exceptions to the rules, but there's definitely a rule where great players seldom make great coaches, right? So the fact that you and I were terrible at European football and geniuses at business is no coincidence.
There's no coincidence at all. I will take that compliment all day long.
So, guys, bring us back. Tell us how you guys got together, started working together, where you got started.
Yeah, a long time ago, really. So we were both running separate businesses. I was running a technology startup, so raised capital, proof of concept, and then scaled that in sort of 10 countries. Me and El, we decided to share an office. So El was running a consultancy and scaling that at the same time. And one of the issues we kept on coming up against, and they're both similar because we're both in sort of the recruitment and HR world, which is trying to get in the room with the right people. So we sort of shared resource and built sort of funnels and automations on how to get in the room with these people. We then both exited those and thought, well, we should do something together. We worked well together. We supported each other. And that's where sort of our first business together officially started. We tried to do loads of other stuff through the years, drinks brands,
bars, alcoholic ice lollies. Terrible idea. Terrible idea. You can't freeze alcohol. So that didn't work.
Yeah, loads of different stuff. But we stumbled on sort of the agency world after constantly sort of not liking working with agencies. I think we did a bad job of finding the right agencies to work with at the right time, which is obviously not the same now, where we work across multiple different agencies. But at the time we were like, we want to be an agency that doesn't feel like, you just, as soon as you buy, you get pushed to the sort of lowest person in the organization and you just do the bare minimum work, which is what it felt like for us. And then, yeah, it's been a journey since there, which obviously you can talk about.
So sort of from there on out, I think it definitely helps also being brothers, by the way. That is also massively beneficial, because you know each other's, how far to push it with the other individual, how far, if somebody's wound up or feeling a little bit emotional about a particular situation, good or bad, you know how to handle that situation. Fighting as kids in the backyard, really winding each other up. You know the boundaries of how far the other or how far you can take it, and that definitely helps. Like when you've got another business partner, we've both had business partners in the past where you've been fearful of delivering bad news because you don't know how they're going to take it. They could fly off the handle or get angry really, really quickly. You don't have to worry about that because you're delivering news to your brother, and if he flies off the handle, then you can laugh in his face, and it's absolutely acceptable. And
So
the other way around.
time of background to prepare you for the business world. So Matt and I have a similar understanding. Obviously, we're not blood brothers, but we're business brothers. The way we manage our relationship is through, and sometimes it's cruel, is through absolute truth.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could do something absolute asinine, as wonderful as I think it is, Matt will tell me, Lou, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. And vice versa. So there's a little bit of introspective honesty, which probably in business is the most difficult thing to do. For a small business owner to look in the mirror and say, I made a mistake. Matt and I have found is the most difficult thing for any small business owner to do. But when you have a conscience in either a cousin, a brother, a partner, or someone that you're in business with, to be that inner conscience and tell you, look, you screwed up, I think the business benefits. But there has to be an understanding at 6 o'clock or after work, you go to the pub or you go to the bar and everything is fine.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think one thing that we really focus on is just sort of leaving the ego at the door. And we try and do that as often as possible, which, most founders have an ego. They wouldn't start a business if they didn't, back themselves in some way, shape or form. But knowing when you've sort of, fucked up is really, key to progressing, I'd say.
And one of the ways that we equally help manage the ego is, despite Dom and I doing completely different roles in all the organizations, we have the same job title. So there is never any hierarchy. There is never any disparity between who Dom and I are. Everybody knows that we don't do the same job. We do different jobs, but everybody knows that we are absolutely aligned and on the same playing field. So inwardly facing to ourselves, we can have disagreements. Outwardly facing to all the teams that we work with, you will see a united front, and we'll take that disagreement offline.
Gents, the two of you seem to be a little bit on the youngish side. Have you undertaken any sort of succession planning in the business? Have you had those discussions, or you're just going to roll the dice and figure where it lays?
Loosely. So we've loosely had sort of like succession planning and where do we want to be, but equally we've tried not to be too rigid with what we're trying to do. So I would say somewhere between rolling the dice and there is a loose plan of what we want to achieve over the next 5 years. How we get there, I'm quite happy to see what journey we take.
So how is marketing in Europe or the UK different than marketing in the US? All things being said, the classic business always relies upon, some core principles, right? We're always leaning on Facebook and social media and maybe some very little print these days, right? So how do you leverage those two environments?
Yeah, good question. I think obviously our main focus and what we would say we're specialists in is sort of B2B marketing. And we have worked with many US and sort of European clients as well. I'd say the major difference, especially in the B2B space, is US is way more transactional and direct. So if it's the right product or the right service, they'll reply and they'll be in the room with you within a couple of hours or a couple of days. Whereas in the UK and in Europe, you have to flirt a little bit more and go back and forth, and people will jump on calls just to be polite. I don't feel like you get that in the US. So similar techniques for sure. Some things I think Europe are further forward in, especially on the data front. And I think that came from GDPR and all the data regulations a few years ago. We had to be very creative with how we source data and how we clean data. So we were definitely ahead of the curve there. But generally, I think it's fairly similar. I think it's just small nuances that are different.
So rumor has it, the two of you have also put together Chapman Capital. Kind of walk the audience through how you've grown and scaled the business through Chapman Capital.
Yeah. So as Dom was saying, or we were saying at the start, we started Social Chaps after 2 previous exits. Agency was doing reasonably well. And we managed to grow that to a nice size. I think we had around about 15 staff in that agency. At which point we were approached by a private equity firm to acquire us. And at that stage, we were sort of 2 years old. There was no plans to sell. We were nowhere near ready to sell. I guess foolishly entertained the conversation, or naively sort of went down the road of, let's see where this goes. We didn't end up taking the offer, but what it did do was open up our eyes to how else we could grow our own portfolio. So it really did whet the appetite for Dom and I to say, okay, we can actually deploy some of the cash that we've got available in Social Chaps and some of the cash that we've got elsewhere into other agencies, because a lot of agencies really struggle with growth. They really struggle to understand how to get in the room, build those key relationships with those key decision makers in their target client customers. So we did exactly that. We targeted and looked for companies that were looking for either a partner or founders that were burnt out, which is quite a common theme in the agency world. You get a founder who's ran an agency for 5 years, got it to a certain point, and they're then looking at, okay, this has been hard work. I've got 20, 30 staff. Do I really want to take this from 1 million to 5 million or 1 million to 2.5 million, which is the next step, which is having just completely given away my life to this whole business. And that's where we come in and we either strike a deal where it's capital down plus our time, or it would be a form of time investment. We've dressed up 6 or 7 deals in completely different ways. So that's where we are with Chapman Capital. We decided to spin it into a group, and we've now got a portfolio of 6 different companies.
Well, Elliot, you're definitely speaking our language. So walk us through how you acquire these businesses. Let's get a little bit more granular. We don't want to put our hands in your pockets, but are you working out joint ventures? Are you doing an outright share transfer? Are you acquiring their book of business? How do you structure these acquisitions? Because it seems like with your expertise, skill set, but with their book of business, it's the classic 1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah, so I'll give you 2 different examples. So Speak on Podcasts, podcast booking agency. They were based out in the US, which for a UK firm is a nightmare, to be completely honest, from a legality perspective, from a financial perspective.
And the language, we have no idea what you guys are saying.
I know, we talk very quickly. Yeah, we've got subtitles on the screen. It's all good. So we decided to, in that instance, acquire the assets, and the assets were the book of business, the relationships with their hosts, essentially the staff, which you wouldn't typically get the staff in a typical asset transaction, whereas we were quite keen to do a normal acquisition, do a normal share transfer, but somehow bypass a lot of the legislation and the legalities that would have been involved in a normal acquisition.
So when did you guys buy Speak on Podcasts? And did you buy 100% of the company, or did you buy a share of it?
So we bought 100% of the company, but then gifted back equity to the 2 previous founders.
Gotcha.
So the reason we did that, a couple of different reasons. One of the founders wanted to stay. One of the founders wanted to go. We were able to do a very quick deal because one of the founders was burnt out and they needed to grow. They needed us. So we were able to quite quickly put together a deal that suited everybody, and they are then tied into the future earnings of the company. So 8 months on, the company now has stable financials. We've got a stable pipeline, stable sales, and genuinely can see the pathway from where we are now to a feasible exit in the next 36 months. And that would not have happened, 12 months ago. It was a completely different commercial model. So that's one example. Another example on a deal we're working on right now is again 100% acquisition, 30-ish% of the money down on day one, and then the remaining 70% paid on the anniversary of the acquisition going through over the next 2 to 3 years. And those performance payments are tied to the performance of the company. So to get really, really granular, we are measuring the company's performance on EBITDA. So not on revenue, not on anything other than EBITDA. And there is a percentage that the company has got to hit in order to release those remaining 3 payments. There is upside benefit and downside benefit.
I love that. I don't know if you guys are aware, but we actually wrote a book on that. It's called Buying the American Dream.
Amazing.
Don't start a business, but buy a business.
We have a volume 2 coming out next week, Buying the UK Dream. Same thing.
By Elliot and Dom.
Same thing.
Co-authored by Elliot and Dom.
So that's perfect, because everything that we are talking about and the world that we're in, obviously it makes sense to you and it makes sense to your listeners. And what I would say is, when we first started out on this journey, we thought genuinely, we entered this going, I have no idea how we're going to do this. It is, I know I'm talking the same language. It is much easier than you think. It is.
So let me ask you guys this. When you're coming with the down payment money, are you using your own capital or are you getting investors? How are you guys structuring these transactions?
Both. So the deal that we're doing right now, we are using purely investors' money, because it's a much larger down payment, and it's not something that I'd be prepared to dip into our own investment.
Yeah, I think also where we are now, we're a safe investment. We've done it 6-7 times over. So having those conversations with investors is a much more palatable conversation with them.
The conversation we had on the first one when we were trying to get investment was like, why would we do that? You are high risk. The plan doesn't even make sense. And now,
and since then, with the Russian sanctions, Dimitri's got to put his money somewhere.
I'll take it. It's fine.
Hey guys, one thing that Matt and I find very difficult, me more than him, is how do those moving pieces communicate? You've got several agencies, several companies. From a management perspective, revenue, do you have a hub and spoke methodology? Is it just chaos and you just make 44 phone calls a day? Work us through how you organize that flow when you're managing several companies.
Yeah, good question. There is a little bit of chaos, and we're working on streamlining a lot
Thank
of it.
you for the honesty.
Yeah. So we're recruiting a sort of business manager. We've already got a PA who works with me and Elle on a daily basis, just sorting out communication, emails. But I think part of it is being strict with your time and what you actually need to achieve in that week, and sort of just split. The good thing about me and Elle is we don't really have to speak too often, and we can both attend different parts of the business and make impacts and then come together at the start of the day or at the end of the day. So we do really get the sort of, double the amount. But yeah, part of it's chaos, but then a lot of it pulls in. So we use Notion, and we have sort of our own operating system. So a lot of things pull into there for me and Elle to see, and just have a bit of a sort of a base dashboard across the business.
So guys, what does your buy box look like? What type of companies are you trying to acquire? Only people in the agency space, or are you looking outside?
So typically only agencies. However, in the last couple of months, there's been a couple of opportunities that we've looked at outside. But that's only because they would add benefit to the portfolio. So I think so for example, the deal that I just spoke to you about, where we were putting the 30% down, 70% split across performance targets, that is a tech company. And typically Dom and I would shy well away from a tech company, having been there before. It's hard work. It takes a long time to realize the investment and the capital, but there is tremendous upside if you get it right. That technology that we are potentially, or that service tech that we're potentially looking to acquire or trying to acquire, would have huge value to the whole portfolio, and we know exactly how we would sell it. So for that, it's ran similar to an agency. We could literally deploy all of our skills in 3 to 6 months, have a really, really solid pipeline, and it's not like selling an out-and-out tech product. So
are you guys looking to eventually roll all these companies into one conglomerate, or are you looking to sell them off piece by piece and manage portfolio companies?
Piece by piece.
Yeah.
Okay.
We are not interested in. We've kept everything completely independent, purposely.
Okay.
There is cross communication. So right now we're in London. We've got 2 of our agencies, employees, like key leadership teams from 2 of our agencies with us in London, doing like a joint offsite. So there is collaboration. There is idea sharing on how to acquire customers, how to onboard customers, best practices around account management. But there is no direct integration between any of the other agencies, and nor do we want there to be. We want them to be completely separate. So with that, there are centralized systems that feed into Dom and I. And one of the key things around, how do you split your time? We would be lying through the skin of our teeth if we said our Monday to Friday was easy, because it isn't. It is chaos. I would describe it as some form of organized chaos. I'd probably also be lying, but it is carnage, but it's also good fun. But what the key thing Dom and I try and do is focus on high impact at the start of the week. Where are the areas in the business that require high impact, and not get dragged into things that you genuinely don't need to get dragged into? Too many agency owners get dragged into the weeds because they want to be doing stuff. Sorry, I know you both got.
How much have you raised from investors so far?
So we've probably raised around about $500,000.
Okay.
Small amount.
And then are those UK investors? Are those US investors?
No, UK.
UK. So how do you guys structure those investments out there? Because I know it's a little bit different than here in the US.
Yeah. So one has been more of a loan, where each month, well, we're cleared up until sort of a 12-month period, and then you've essentially got to start paying that loan back, and that person wants, or that group of individuals want their money back. So it's investment, but it's more of a typical loan. The deal that we're doing at the moment, which would be a significant investment for us, they are a traditional investor. They are going to control and want a significant chunk of the company. And for that, we are going to run it for them. And we've then got a clear strategy of how we get out of that in the next 5 years. So there's
where are you guys finding these companies to acquire?
a couple of different routes. You've got our own network, which is probably the most prominent. We've got a good network of people that know what we're about, the profile, the portfolio that we're trying to build. So there's probably 4 or 5 key people, sort of non-execs, former founders who've exited, who are sitting across boards of other agencies who we've got their ear, and it's in return. And they're also a real good source of capital as well. So when we were talking about investors, they're agency founders who have exited and have got a decent lump of cash and a board, but can also add value, are a good source of capital for us. We try to steer away from private or banks if we can. However, the truth of it is, when you've got a deal and it needs to be done relatively quickly, you do what needs to be done in order to get the deal done.
Oh, absolutely. We do it all day long.
Yeah.
You're asking about how we find the agencies.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah. How you fund the agencies? You're going out and you're marketing, that's what you guys do. That's what I would assume, right?
Yeah.
Now, the agencies that you're acquiring, do they each have a specific niche, or are they industry agnostic and they're all basically doing the same thing?
They do have their own niche in some sense, more down on the services that they provide and where they sit within the market. So we have a couple of agencies who do similar things, but one does sort of luxury brands, so their retainers will be 10K a month, and another one does slightly smaller work, and theirs will be like 3 to 4K a month. So again, it's that cross-selling and cross-communication. When we're sort of pushing leads into all these different businesses, we know where to direct them.
When you're acquiring these agencies, do you distinguish and maintain key personnel within those companies?
Great question. So yeah, one of the key things we do, which is fairly common, is we, as part of the acquisition deal, so it will be in the heads, it will be in all of the documentation that you get, we will portion off a section of the company to key employees. And that will be worked out with us and the seller. So they will identify the key people that need to be, actually vested in. So if they left tomorrow, we'd be in a really, really bad position. We tie them into the deal and we tie them into the long-term future of what we're trying to achieve. So that is almost a staple of every single deal that we've done. We have tied key employees to that business so that they feel somewhat vested.
So guys, why don't you tell everybody right now where they can find you, where they can get in touch with you on social channels, email, anything that you guys have available?
Yeah. So email is elliot@chapman.capital. So drop us a line if you're an agency or you're interested in learning a little bit more about our model, how we work and our portfolio. And then to connect with Dom and I, Elliot Chapman on LinkedIn, 2 L's, 1 T, and Dom Chapman on LinkedIn as well, which is a sore subject because he's only just got his LinkedIn back after being hacked.
Yeah.
Got my LinkedIn hacked.
Yeah.
Oh, that's terrible. I'm glad you said 1 T, because when I was writing the email, I actually put 2 and I had to go back and delete the other T when I looked at it.
2 L's, 1 T. Blame my parents.
So, anyway, guys, we want to be respectful of your time. We really appreciate you being here. I'm sure the audience took a lot out of this, but I have one question before I let you run.
And I have a follow-up question. Go ahead, Matt.
What's your favorite soccer team?
Oh, that's easy. They're not the best, but Southampton. We're both Southampton fans, both season ticket holders.
Yeah, but actually, it's actually quite a depressing subject, to be honest, for us right now. We just got relegated from the Premier League, and we're about to sell our captain. So let's move on.
Yeah, so Matt, for everyone in the audience who doesn't understand who relegation is, not everyone, like in American sports, gets a damn trophy. If you don't have a good season, you go to a lower division. And if you have a really good season, you go to an upper division. That's called capitalism, unlike our socialist franchise state in America. But to follow up on that question, so who's going to win the Premier League this year?
Probably Man City. Man City have not only got the best squad, but they've also got the best manager. I can't see past Man City being beaten. I'd probably put
Elliot and Dom, and this is very important for you folks. Eventually, there's so much success that you develop what my grandfather used to call the fat belly. How do you stay hungry?
Well, literally, I mean, he's hungry all the time. The boy does not stop eating. I think certainly for the short term, we could let our imagination run wild and start looking at what the next 10, 20, 30 years look like. For us, what's really important is just focusing on the next couple of years. We've got a fantastic opportunity in front of us. We've done a decent job up to this point to create a really strong portfolio. Our focus now is actually executing on what we've signed up and what other founders have bought into us, what investors have bought into us. So let's execute that in the next 3 to 5 years, and then we can let ourselves dream over the next 10, 20 years.
Elliot, Dom, thank you so much for being here. Guys, that's a wrap of the Liquid Lunch Project. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the show. And make sure you subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you on the next episode of the Liquid Lunch Project.